congressional district. Some of you might live in the 1st congressional district, and some of you might live in the 6th congressional district. Okay, for you folks, it does no good for me to send letters to Keith Ellison saying, Keith, they're saying bad things, they're saying inaccurate things about Iran. He knows it. But you in the 1st, the 3rd, and the 6th, you need to write your representative. I mean, I'm really, really serious, because it does no good to preach to the choir. They need to hear from you, and they need to know that you know that this is inaccurate. Yes.
Raising 4th.
Oh, 4th district too. Okay.
A little pressure there won't hurt.
A little pressure in the 4th. Okay, and in the 2nd as well. Okay. I don't know where all of you are coming from, but I'm just thinking geographically about the immediate area around here. But the 2nd and the 4th are also very, very important. So keep this in mind, because it's only going to be through citizen action that we get any kind of curtailment of the current situation that's going on in Congress. We have a bill that is working its way through the U.S. Senate. This is a bill that's sponsored by Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and Joe Lieberman of Connecticut, and it is a bill that calls on Iran to suspend all enrichment of uranium, even for peaceful purposes, and declares that Iran is more dangerous than the Soviet Union. And these are U.S. senators, folks, your representatives. Iran is more dangerous than the Soviet Union. Do you believe it? I mean, really. Not only that, but they declare that the United States should not even engage in diplomatic talks with Iran. So this is a bill that is trying to force the administration into accepting some kind of violent action against Iran by cutting out every other possible avenue. Please watch out for it, and please get in touch with our 2 Senate representatives, Amy Klobuchar and Al Franken, and ask them to certainly not sign on to this bill and absolutely to resist it. Well, let me go back to what I was saying before about the resistance to an Iranian attack on the part of Israel and the United States. The Israeli defense analysts also warned that if Israel were to attack Iran in a first strike venture, that there's a possibility for 15,000 rockets to be launched against Israel. And the defense forces have said not only the port of Haifa, which was attacked during skirmishes with Hezbollah and Hamas earlier, but also unthinkably the city of Jerusalem. And it was thought that the city of Jerusalem would be exempt from military attack because of the large number of Muslim shrines, including the Dome of the Rock, one of the second most sacred shrine in all of Islam. But the Israeli Defense Forces are now warning their government that even Jerusalem might be attacked if Israel launches this first strike. So this is published information and has been widely circulated through the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Haaretz is a very good newspaper for you to read if you're interested in reading the Israeli press, because it is one of the newspapers that prints a wide variety of opinion about Israeli politics and about Israeli politicians, and they're quite fearless. So, why is Israel? Is Netanyahu and Ehud Barak and some other officials in Israel? Why are they planning on or talking about an attack against Iran? So the ostensible reason that they give is that Iran will be entering a, quote, zone of immunity, unquote, where their progress toward a nuclear weapon, and actually they acknowledge that they don't have one now, but they've moved the line, and they're saying that it's not enough to be wary of Iran having a nuclear weapon. It's when Iran makes progress toward a nuclear weapon that we need to launch a military attack against it. And they're saying that the progress will be so extensive that their underground concealment of their activities so impregnable that there'll be no way for Israel or any other power to stop them should they decide to go forth and manufacture weapons. Now this sounds reasonable, and this is what has been put forward in the press, also by the US Congress, except for the fact that Iran's nuclear facilities are all under inspection by the IAEA. They're all under inspection. There are IAEA inspectors at every single nuclear site, site where nuclear material is being handled in Iran. The only underground facility in Iran is the Fordo plant near the city of Qom. And Iran declared the Fordo plant before they moved any equipment or any fissile material into that plant. It was declared way before. And when they declared it, the IAEA was under the direction of Mohammed al-Baradei. They did an inspection of the Fordo plant immediately after its declaration. And Mohammed al-Baradei said, there is nothing here. It is a hole in the ground. Now they've since moved some centrifuges in there and have begun enriching uranium, a very small amount of uranium to a 20% level, to create a 20% uranium plates to generate isotopes for the treatment of cancer. Now, this is also not a surprise. Iran told the United States 2 years before establishing the Fordo plant that uranium enriched to the 20% level that they already possessed, which the United States gave Iran before the revolution, had now been exhausted. It was no longer producing isotopes for cancer treatment in a sufficient supply to be able to continue the cancer treatments. And in Iran, there are about 800,000 individuals who are under treatment for cancer using radiation. So this created a crisis. So Iran, 2 years before the Fordo plant was established, called on the United States through the Swiss embassy, said our supply of this enriched uranium is exhausted. We need more. Will you supply us with this small amount of uranium so that we can continue to treat cancer? The U.S. refused, flatly refused. And then the U.S. came back with a counteroffer, and they said, we'll give you the 20% uranium that you need in order to fuel your medical reactor. It'll be supplied by Russia only if you'll move all of your, or essentially all of your low enriched uranium that you've already enriched away from Iran, out of the country. And so if you'll trade all of your low enriched uranium, which is ostensibly being generated for electric power, out of the country, we'll give you the small amount of 20% uranium that you need in order to fuel this medical reactor. And the Iranians said, well, that's just no deal. I mean, I'm sorry, this can't happen. So the deal blew up. There was a subsidiary deal that was going to move the low enriched uranium to Turkey, but it really was just beside the point because the exchange arrangement was completely unfair, and what the Iranians saw was the United States and the United States and the European powers trying to completely shut down their uranium enrichment program in order to be able to get this small amount of medical material. So Iran said, okay, there is no deal. We'll do it ourselves. We'll enrich the uranium ourselves to the 20% level. Immediately, what happened in the United States is that we got members of Congress and the press and organizations that have aligned themselves against Iran, namely the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the American Enterprise Institute, and the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Do pay attention to those names because you'll see them on the air all the time. And these are people whose sole purpose, for the most part, is to try to get an attack launched against Iran. They immediately began to say, ooh, Iran is enriching uranium to 20%. Well, it's only a hop, skip, and a jump before they enrich it to 90% and we'll be able to make a bomb. Of course, that's not true. You can enrich the uranium to 20%, and maybe the enrichment process is easier to 90%. You still need a facility to actually convert it into weaponizable material. You need a facility to actually manufacture a bomb. You need a delivery system in order to be able to deliver a bomb, and you need to test the bomb. And when at the time that this was taking place, it was estimated that Iran had enough low-enriched uranium to make one bomb if they converted it to weaponizable material. So Iran builds the plant to make the fissile material for the bomb. They build the bomb. They somehow develop a delivery system for the bomb. Then they test their one bomb, and then they don't have any bombs. Okay, so this is the country that is the greatest danger to the entire world today, greater than the danger posed by the Soviet Union during the Cold War, greater than the danger posed by Pakistan that has how many nuclear weapons, greater than the danger that Israel poses with how many nuclear weapons already in existence with delivery systems already there. So it is such an extraordinary exaggeration that it really defies all logic and all sensibility that are taking place. So all of the material in Iran, even the material that's buried, is under IAEA inspection. This, by the way, does not stop the critics who say, yes, but we don't know about the probable many sites that Iran is hiding from us. Well, there's no evidence that they exist, and it is really very. By the way, people have tried. We have drones roving over Iran, taking pictures. We have Israeli intelligence, Mossad, operating in Iran, ostensibly involved in assassination of nuclear scientists. There are 4 of them that have been assassinated already. So it's not that these sites these imaginary sites have not been found because nobody's looking. Everybody's looking, and they haven't found them. So I think we have to conclude that they really don't exist. Nevertheless, again, on the speculation that there might possibly be nuclear sites that we don't know about, this continual drumbeat to war goes on. So one has to look, again, to the principal force that is driving the idea of attack on Iran right now, and that is, I'm afraid to say, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Ehud Barak. Now, what you have to understand about the Prime Minister and about Mr. Barak, but primarily the Prime Minister, is that Benjamin Netanyahu is not just recently the Prime Minister of Israel. He had another term as Prime Minister of Israel during the Clinton administration. And in 1996, he spoke of the immediate danger facing Israel. But at that time, the danger was Iraq, wasn't Iran. That was the immediate danger facing Israel. And he sought the advice of a group of American neoconservatives. This group was headed by Richard Pearl. It included Douglas Feith, David Wormser, his wife Myra Wormser, also 2 people that you don't know so well, James Colbert, Robert Lowenberg, and Charles Fairbanks. But they authored a report called A Clean Break. Now, some of you may want to note this down. A clean break, a new strategy for securing the realm. It's quite easy to find information on a clean break. It has been published. There is a Wikipedia page for it. So this is not information that is hidden or secret. It has been out there for a very, very long time. And the clean break pushed for regime change throughout the Middle East. The first nation to be attacked and to undergo regime change, according to this plan, was to be Iraq. because Saddam Hussein was the easiest dictator to overthrow in their estimation. The second was to be Syria. And the third was to be Iran. And the conclusion of this report was that after all of these governments are changed, after we have regime change in every one of these governments, then there will be peace in the Middle East and Israel will be safe. Okay, now fast forward a couple of years to the establishment of an organization called the Project for the New American Century. This, in 1997 and 1998, issued a series of prescriptions for U.S. action to, by the way, Newt Gingrich, who was Speaker of the House at the time, to President Clinton, and to other officers, including our Secretary of Defense at the time. The Project for the New American Century essentially repeated exactly the prescriptions that were laid out by the people who wrote A Clean Break. And it's no surprise, because it was the same people, augmented by Donald Rumsfeld, by Dick Cheney, by John Bolton. And if you go, again, there's a Wikipedia page for the Project for the New American Century. You can go there, you can see all of the people that have been associated with it. Anybody and everybody who has advocated violent action against Iran was connected to the Project for the New American Century. Anybody. And it's a long, long, long list. One person who shows up regularly in the New York Times is Reuel Marc Gerecht, a former CIA agent who did some work in Iran. Every 6 months, because the New York Times has a 6-month limit on when you can appear if you're not a staffer, Reuel Marc Gerecht prints an article that says we should attack Iran, and the New York Times prints it. And he's been at it ever since for the last 15 years, essentially, promulgating these ideas. So, of course, these individuals, all of them got, pretty much all of them got posts in the George W. Bush administration. Richard Perle, John Bolton, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Douglas Feith, David Wormser, Ira Wormser, Danielle Pletka. These are all individuals who were in the Clinton administration advocating for an attack against Iran. They had advised Benjamin Netanyahu to do this, and they were deeply involved with the Bush administration. Of course, the United States did invade Iraq, did depose Saddam Hussein, and that encouraged the group that their plan was working. We just had 2 days ago, I believe it was 2 days ago, in the New York Times an op-ed that was written by an Israeli defense official, which virtually could have been written by the same people who wrote A Clean Break and who promulgated the plans for a Project for the New American Century, saying that now that it looks like that Syria is out of the way, the next step is Iran. So we see this idea, this 15-year-old idea, going forward. This is not surprising to me, because as an anthropologist, I can tell you that ideas die very, very slowly, and foreign policy and military policy tends to lumber on from administration to administration in countries, kind of like a blind, drunken elephant, moving forward. And the elephant imagery is not accidental. So you have a blind, drunken elephant moving forward, despite all logic to the contrary. If it had been established as a modus operandi at some earlier point. So, although many of the neoconservatives are out of power, not all of them are. They lurk around at the sort of second secretary level in the Department of State, in the Department of Defense, in our United Nations delegation. They are still there, and as I said before, the think tanks in Washington, the American Enterprise Institute, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, WINIP, and the American and APAC, as well as the military arm of support for Israeli defense, JINSA, which I would also caution you to take a look at. JINSA is so extreme that actually they don't get much in the media, but they're very important. Even the Council on Foreign Relations and the Brookings Institute gets in the game from time to time, and it's really very, very sad to see this turn in our more established think tanks with PhD, political scientists and others and historians cheering on this situation. But there's more. And even though we have this cheerleading squad here in the United States, picked up by the press and by our congressional representatives, even so, almost everybody in the United States urges caution with regard to Iran. They know how dangerous a conflagration in the Middle East would be. So why is Israel pushing this forward? Now, I am going to say something very speculative and very controversial. And that is that a lot of this lies in the temperament of Benjamin Netanyahu himself, his person. If you read Haaretz and other Israeli press reports about Benjamin Netanyahu, you see that the Israelis themselves see a streak of megalomania in Benjamin Netanyahu's personality. The newspaper Haaretz, the writer Carl Stringer, who's written a lot about Benjamin Netanyahu, wrote in last year that Netanyahu likes to think in large historical contexts, and he likes to model himself along the lines of great statesmen. So far, Churchill has been his favorite, because Bibi thinks of himself as the Churchill who warns the world of political Islam, while the Chamberlains of this world are trying to appease it. Now, this is a very dangerous kind of thinking. I mean, it isn't even realistic to characterize that as Churchill's view. I mean, I think that certainly we had a spite between Churchill and Chamberlain, but Churchill was not always steadfastly opposed to everything that took place in his government. So it is a very difficult situation. But there's a lot of hubris here. There's a lot of grandiloquence. But there is a problem. There's a folie à deux going on in Israel. And the second party to this folie à deux is Ehud Barak. And Barak has his own hero. And his hero is Charles de Gaulle. Ehud Barak makes no bones about the fact that he's an ardent fan of Charles de Gaulle, who made decisions that shaped modern France by ignoring his own ministers and ignoring his own military leaders, and making bold decisions that turned out, one thinks, well for France. But it is not a very good generalizable posture for every situation. It isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of posture that one might have. So the specter of a Churchill and a de Gaulle at the helm in Israel, ignoring their own advisors and convinced that they are right and the world is wrong, is an extremely dangerous situation. Netanyahu had the idea to reshape the Middle East already 15 years ago. So this is not something new. It's not something that was concocted yesterday or last week. It's something that has been lying around and moving forward at a very slow pace for some time. Now we see Iraq completely reshaped, and Israel would say that Iraq is not a danger, not the greatest danger to them any longer. We see Syria under siege. They are encouraged. And the next card to fall in this house of cards is going to be, according to this plan, would be Iran. And so all Iran needs is a little push, and they think that Iran can be eliminated. But, my friends, Iran is not Syria. Iran is not Iraq. It is a very, very different place. And it has a very different history. It has a very different background and a very different social composition. Also, it has an extremely different form of government than either Iraq or Syria. And here's where we go back to the question of the Arab Spring. And I want to make sure I don't overstay my welcome here, but the Arab Spring and the Iranian Revolution and the current resistance that we see on the part of Iran to Western influence all have the same origins, and again, they're very old. The origin of the current Arab Spring, and as I say, and the Iranian Revolution, goes back to the 19th century. And in the 19th century, all of the areas of the Middle East were under siege by the European powers, by Europe, by especially Great Britain and Russia. They had seen the rise through the Industrial Revolution of modern military power, which resulted in huge losses of territory to all of the great empires of the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire and the Iranian Qajar Empire. Iran used to control all of the Caucasus and all of Central Asia. The Ottoman Empire controlled the area north of the Black Sea, most of the Ukraine. And all of these were lost to Imperial Russia. And the control of the southern route to India through the Persian Gulf was lost to Great Britain. That's how we got the states like the United Arab Emirates, like Kuwait, like Qatar, like Bahrain. These were all established as military outposts for the British in order to protect their routes to India. So the economic advantages of Europe were robbing, according to the people in the Middle East, were robbing them of their economic base. Maybe you'll be surprised to know that the largest base of economic activity in the Middle East before the advent of oil were textiles. And these textiles were enormously lucrative. Silk and wool and carpets and actual cloth. But the Industrial Revolution completely eliminated that as a source of income for people in the Middle East. Hand-loom carpets remained, but that was a minor part of the economy. So the rulers in both the Ottoman Empire and the Iranian Qajar Empire cooked up a deal to modernize their army to get income back to the throne. That was to sell concessions to the West. So that is essentially selling off their country to their enemies. And so they sold agricultural rights in Egypt, for instance. The Khedive of Egypt, Muhammad Ali, cooked up a deal with the British and the Belgian to establish cotton plantations in Egypt. Really plantations, just like in the South in the United States, except using the Egyptian fellah as cheap labor on the cotton plantations. That's why you have your 1,000 count sheets that you can get at Bloomingdale's, because the Egyptian long staple cotton comes from that period of time. And eventually, as minerals became more important, the mineral rights were all sold off to Europeans, and that's how the oil exploration came about in the Persian Gulf. Well, toward the end of the 19th century, the people began to catch on that their patrimony was being sold out from under them. And they established a very clear formula for assessing blame in this situation. That was what they saw was Europeans in conjunction with their own rulers exploiting the population of these countries for their patrimony. And the resistance started already in about 1875. And we went through a whole series of revolutions. There was a constitutional revolution in Iran. There were riots in Egypt. There was an important tobacco concession in Iran, where a Belgian gentleman was given the right to cultivate, to harvest, to process, and to sell all tobacco raised in Iran. And the religious authorities at that time declared tobacco to be haram, a good idea, I guess. And people threw their water pipes out their windows into the streets and broke them until the concession was repealed. So this is not anything new. Now, what happened, of course, during World War I was that the Ottoman Empire, unfortunately, took the side of the Axis powers. And as a result, the British and the French completely took over Ottoman territory in the Middle East and established completely new nations there. Nations that had never existed before, that were with populations working together that had never existed before. Lebanon was not an existing country. It didn't exist before the end of World War I. Iraq did not exist in its current configuration. Syria did not exist. Syria existed, but it doesn't have its present form. And Jordan really didn't exist. It was created out of whole cloth in order to give a throne to the second son of the Sharif of Mecca. Faisal, you remember, went to Iraq and became king. And then the second son of the Sharif of Mecca, who had issued a fatwa saying it was okay for Arabs to fight against other Muslims, to fight against the Turks, was given the throne of Jordan, King Abdullah. So we have people stuck together who never had to live together before. Lebanon with a Shia majority, a Sunni population, second in population, and a Christian Maronite population that was third. But the Christian Maronites were favored by the French, and they established the constitution of Lebanon so that the Christian Maronite community would always have the presidency. A minority ruling a majority. Can't work. Syria, through a series of machinations, was not, they originally, by the way, had Faisal as their king. They threw him out and established a new order in Syria. But frankly, through their own negligence, they ended up creating an army that consisted entirely of religious minorities, or almost entirely, including the Alawites. And the Alawites one day woke up after World War II and they discovered they were in the majority in Syria, and they took over the government. They were the majority of the army in Syria, and they took over the government. Again, a minority ruling a majority. This is not good. And of course, Iraq, with three very disparate populations: the Kurds, the Sunnis in the middle of the country, and the Shiites in the south, which are the majority population, or a large plurality anyway, in Iraq. Iran, after World War II, had its Shah Reza Pahlavi, deposed by both the British and the Americans because he had not been sufficiently supportive of the Allied effort in Europe. So these countries, all of these countries, and Egypt, of course, had a king that was installed by the British until 1954, King Farouk. Some of you may be old enough to remember King Farouk when you were 5 years old or so. King Farouk, who, by the way, whose daughter was the first wife of the Shah of Iran. Interesting. But the King Farouk was established, and in '54 there was a revolution, and Nasser came to power. He was the first native Egyptian to rule Egypt in 1,000 years. So we continue on down to the present day, where you have populations who have 100 years of history of European powers allying with dictatorial rulers to try to exploit the populations of their countries. And the situation has changed with these populations. They used to be largely illiterate. They didn't have a lot of education. In the 21st century, everybody is educated now. Everybody's been to MIT. They've been to Caltech. They've been to the University of Minnesota. These are not stupid people anymore. And so the revolt, the Arab Spring, is a reaction to exactly those forces that have been in place for more than 100 years, 150 years. And the early leader of course, in this was the Iranian Revolution of 1978, 1979. Now, the only reason that the Iranian Revolution didn't spread immediately is the unfortunate fact that Iran is a dominant Shia state. And the Sunnis applauded the revolution, but they don't want a government like we have in Iran. And the government in Iran will not be overthrown because they learned their lesson. They learned that a dictator like the Shah, if he's toppled, that creates a revolution. So they created a government that has about 150 important decision makers and leaders with interlocking offices that don't all get changed at the same time. We'll have a we'll have a parliamentary election in Iran this year. We have a presidential election in Iran next year. This is so that there can never be an elimination of a power base in Iran in order to actually topple the government. This is what the people who advocate regime change in Iran don't bother to learn. that the Iranian government in its constitution is a miracle of Baroque complexity. And it is designed precisely to prevent the toppling of a dictator like Saddam Hussein and a complete changeover in government as a result of the elimination of one person. If you were to eliminate Ayatollah Khamenei, the spiritual leader of the country would go on. If you were to eliminate President Ahmadinejad, who by the way has very little power, the country would go on. So there is, so the idea of doing something, bombing Iran or creating economic conditions that are so awful that the people would rise up and overthrow their own government, is a fantasy. It is actually the worst kind of naive fantasy. It's the kind of thing that I would never even expect from my freshmen in college. And yet we see it promulgated by our legislators and by our national leaders. And as an educator, I got to tell you that this really, really disheartens me, because I feel that we have people in charge who don't bother to read. They don't bother and their staffers don't bother to inform them about the realities of the situation. So all of these things, as you can see, are very intricately tied together. And if we want to understand the Middle East in all of its complexity, we really do have to do a little studying. And I've spent a long, long time trying to educate myself about the Middle East. And I try very hard in talks like this to help all of you to understand how the dynamics of the Middle East are working today, and in particular to help you to be skeptical about what you're reading in the press. Always go back to original documents, always go back to original quotes, and do understand that in today's world, our American press is not accurate with regard to the Middle East. It is massively inaccurate, even the sources that you most trust. Most of the accurate information, unfortunately, is not getting into the mainstream press. You have to look for it online. Thank God for the internet, because the people who really know something can't get through. They can't break through into the mainstream press. The ideological forces and the editorial forces in the mainstream press do not want to hear this material. The narrative, at least with regard to Iran, continues to be that Iran must be attacked. The regime of Iran must be changed. And news stories and editorials are written in order to conform to that idea. And of course, the Iranians went through a revolution in 1978, 1979. Their slogan was neither east nor west. They are not going to buckle to the forces of the United States or Europe. And I'll tell you this, that those people who were clamoring for the United States to support, for instance, the Green Movement or any other opposition movement in Iran are also very foolish, because the Iranians have had 150 years of meddling from the outside where regimes were changed, and they know that story. And so the Iranian resistance, the Iranian reformers in Iran say repeatedly, do not do anything to associate yourself with us. If we're going to have a change in the Iranian government, which is actually something that I support and I think would be very admirable. There's a lot of human rights violations in Iran that need taken care of, a lot of economic problems in Iran. But I know that if the United States mucks into this scenario, anybody that comes to power with the association of the United States or European powers will be discredited and will not be able to do their job. So we need to stay out, and we need to protect the processes that are taking place within Iran itself. And of all things, we need to avoid any kind of conflict that's going to cause a conflagration within the Middle East. It will only make things worse. So thank you very much, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
It says a senior Israeli official said Thursday that the missile testing site near Tehran that was destroyed in a huge explosion 3 months ago was developing missiles with a range of some 6,000 miles.
This is just a lie.
Well, I'm sure it is. I wasn't sure about whether I heard you correctly. It was 15,000 rockets that ran.
What the Israelis are counting are rockets that they suppose to be in the hands of Hezbollah or in the hands of Hamas. Now, Iran does not now have Iran does not have a missile that would reach the United States, and not only that, but such a missile is not in development. So this is just flat out nonsense. And when I hear something like that, and we know the military capabilities of Iran at present, I have to assume that this is a political statement that's designed to shore up the idea that somehow Israel should attack Iran. But mostly, if they're saying that Iran is developing missiles that would reach the United States, it's to get United States compliance with an Israeli attack. That's the reason that these statements are issued. Notice there are no missiles. There is no missile site that anymore. We're talking about somebody speculating on something that, I don't know, might have been, maybe it was in somebody's mind, and this is no reason to go to war. It's not a casus belli.
Talk to us about these terrible sanctions that our government and so much of the world is supporting.
The United States has had sanctions on Iran ever since the hostage crisis. So we've had 40 years of sanctions against Iran. But what is interesting is that nobody knows exactly why the sanctions were originally enacted or what Iran was supposed to do to get them lifted. Now, even now, when we've increased the sanctions on Iran, it's not clear what they're supposed to do. Now, I think that we've asked this question, by the way, of our legislators and others. So there are sanctions in place. Give us a laundry list of what Iran is supposed to do in order to get the sanctions listed. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. They're just there. This is not a formula for ameliorating the situation in the world today. What the United States is saying is that Iran's nuclear enrichment activities are illegal. By the way, they are not illegal. Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The preamble to the treaty gives Iran the inalienable right, and every other signatory, the inalienable right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. And since we have 20 IAEA reports that says Iran is doing just that, and 7 national intelligence estimates that Iran is doing just that, and our Director of National Intelligence and our Secretary of Defense saying that Iran does not have nuclear weapons, it would seem that Iran would have the right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. Now, there are 19 other countries that are enriching uranium exactly as Iran is doing, and a couple of them, Brazil and Japan, have openly declared that we're enriching uranium to the point where we could build nuclear weapons if we want to. Now, that's exactly what the United States is trying to prevent Iran from doing, from coming to that point. But we're not sanctioning Japan, we're not sanctioning Brazil, and the situation is completely, exactly parallel. So the question about what the sanctions are supposed to accomplish is really unclear. Now, probably Iran is going to weather these sanctions situations. This is I was mentioning out in the lobby, the politicians in Iran are not innocent here. When there's the Rahm Emanuel quote that says, "Never let a good crisis go to waste," and the Iranian officials have actually made the situation somewhat worse by engaging in currency speculation and in cutting out subsidies to the population for bread, for gasoline, for other things that have actually made the situation worse. And then they can point to the United States and blame the sanctions. So we have been feeding into the bad political motives of Iranian officials by enacting these sanctions. And guess what? When the sanctions are enacted and Iran can't supply oil, the price of oil goes up, so they make it up eventually in higher oil prices. You will see, my friends, you will see $4 and $5 oil prices in the coming spring and summer. I promise you. Call me a liar if I'm wrong, but I will tell you that that's going to happen.
Could you spell out our self-interest to buy into this charade, particularly the media, when my perception is most Americans look back at the war in Iraq and go, how could we have been so foolish? So what's going on?
The agenda gearing up hostility toward Iran, as far as I think anybody can see, is precisely parallel to the agenda that preceded the hostility toward Iraq. It's the same kind of scare tactics, same kind of frankly lying to the public, the same spin put on information. So that, for instance, again, Leon Panetta says Iran is not making bombs. We don't know when they'll start making bombs. And then the news media comes out and says Leon Panetta says Iran will start making bombs. Okay, that's what we get. And it's the Judith Miller scenario with the New York Times, spinning stories in order to favor hostility toward Iraq, repeated with Iran. Now, again, go back to 1996. The plan to take out and reform and engage in regime change in the Middle East was a reasonable plan, but it was just a directive. It said, let's take them out. They have a problem. They have a public relations problem. You still have to get the public to go along. You can't just, we're in a states that consider themselves to be democratic. You can't just, order it. We're not kings anymore. You can't just order an attack. So the Bush administration, starting in 2003, tried to develop a whole series of justifications for an attack against Iran, just like they developed a whole set of justifications for an attack against Iraq. And the one thing that will play well with the American public is the idea of some kind of nuclear danger. That is, Americans, they don't understand it, it's all very confusing, but the idea that, somehow a bomb might be dropped in Central Park or on, in the center of Minneapolis is enough to get people going. So they can say, yeah, well, if they're going to drop a bomb on the U.S., maybe we better take them out first. So the if there is a very big if. So that was, they tried a couple of other things too. They tried to, the Bush administration tried to claim that the United States was supporting Al Qaeda, and that was a bust. It was ridiculous. I mean, Al Qaeda is they're Salafi Muslims who believe that you can that killing Shia is allowed under religious law. So the Iranians, who are 90%, 98% Shia, are not likely to be supporting the Taliban very much, or Al Qaeda with those kinds of beliefs. And they also tried very hard to claim that when the United States Army was in Iraq, that Iran was directing attacks against U.S. soldiers in Iraq. They tried very, very hard to demonstrate that there was U.S. That there was Iranian equipment that was being used to attack U.S. soldiers. They couldn't produce a scrap of it, not one piece, nothing. So in the end, these were all false claims that were designed to try to get the United States to go along with some kind of hostile action toward Iran. I should say, even without proving anything, they've done very well, because next time you sit down to someone on a plane, say, what do you think about the Iranian nuclear program? The person next to you will say, well, Iran's got nuclear weapons, they're going to bomb Israel. They'll tell you that. They believe, the public has come to believe this. It is, so the propaganda, which has gone on now for 7-8 years, has been very effective as what we call truth by repetition. So that even though it's false, you just simply come out and say that it's not.
Would you comment on the situation in Syria and what's happening? And on the one hand, we don't want to get involved militarily, and yet our hearts bleed for all that's going on.
The situation in Syria is extremely complex. When Hafez al-Assad came to power, he was I've forgotten his rank in the military, but he was a military man, a corporal or a captain, and he was part of this contingent of this Alawite minority that actually dominates the military forces. Alawites and Druze are the principal components of the Syrian army, and he was a very, very hard-nosed and iron-fisted ruler. He was a true dictator. He was a member of a minority community ruling over a majority community, and the majority Sunni in Syria, different than many other places in the Middle East, rebelled. And if you remember, he suppressed brutally a rebellion in Homs and Hama about 20 years ago. It was a really terrible thing. When Assad died, he had one son who was his handpicked successor, who unfortunately died before his father. And he was left with his other son, Bashar, an ophthalmologist trained in London, who didn't want to do anything except be an eye doctor. Suddenly, here is Bashar thrust into power after his father died, and really compelled to take the office. Bashar virtually disappeared from view for about 5 years after he took office, and that made everybody understand that. And by the way, in Syria, if you go there, you'll see that Bashar's picture doesn't appear any place without the picture of his father next to him. So you get the idea that, of how this is worked out in terms of the leadership authority. The truth is that Syria is not ruled by Bashar. He's a sacrificial goat, and he's been. I don't think his actions have been admirable, but he's a puppet. He's being ruled by the generals in the Syrian army, who know that if there were a change in power, their situation would be very, very precarious, very difficult, and they don't want to. Openly establish another kind of military dictatorship in the country. Now, the truth is that if there were a massive uprising of Sunni Muslims in Syria, the religious minorities would be in danger. There would be a civil war, and so this is one of the things that I think that everybody is trying to avoid. The United States is standing on the side cheering for the demise of the Bashar regime, but cooler heads, at least I hope, realize that a civil war is not in anybody's interest in Syria. So the Arab League knows this too. That's why they tried to calm the situation with a kind of a solution, which was again rejected by the generals. So I don't have a ready, I don't have a solution to this problem. The political configuration and the military configuration of Syria is what it is. We're going to have this very strong minority-dominated army to deal with in any kind of an aftermath. But I can tell you this: that if Bashar were shot today, shot dead, They would not stop the problems that are taking place in the country. So the fact that Iran is allied with Syria is one of the things that confuses the situation. The fact that Russia is allied with Syria and has been ever since the time of the Soviet Union is also a confounding element, and that's why Russia, of course, vetoed the UN resolution against the Syrian government.
Do you think it likely or possible that Israelis and Iranians are engaging in warfare with both Netanyahu and Ahmadinejad as the chief spokesman and a bodyguard of lies, the most prominent weapons?
There's one important difference between Benjamin Netanyahu and President Ahmadinejad. Netanyahu has real power. Ahmadinejad does not. And so they can engage in a war of words, but President Ahmadinejad has no control over the Iranian military. He has no control over Iranian foreign affairs. He has no control over weapon systems or the atomic energy program. None at all. His role in Iran is somewhat analogous to a city manager in a town that has a mayor and a council that hold the real power. So he talks big and he has a big mouth, but frankly, the fact that he talks big and has a big mouth is used against Iran by outside forces because they take the title president and they think that he has some kind of power to push a red button and launch missiles against Israel. He does not. But Benjamin Netanyahu does have power, and Ehud Barak does have power. They do command the military, and so no matter what their military generals and others say about the inadvisability of attacking Iran, if they say that they'll do it, that they should do it, and give them the orders to do it, they can and will. So, but you're right in the sense that this is most everybody who knows anything in Israel knows that Iran is not a danger to Israel. They know it really. I mean, that there's no real danger, and not only that, but Ayatollah Khamenei and President Ahmadinejad, despite the kind of nasty things they've said about Israel, they also said that Iran will not attack any other country as a first attack. They've said it repeatedly. And there's also a fatwa that's been issued by Ayatollah Khamenei saying that Iran will not build nuclear weapons. It's against Islamic law. So they know that the chances that Iran would actually prove an existential danger to Israel are virtually nil. But you can get a lot of traffic out of a war of words, a lot of internal bona fides from attacking Iran verbally. And again, look at the presidential campaign here in the United States. Presidential candidate gets up and says we should attack Iran. Yay! Sure, I'm going to vote for him. He's going to attack Iran. This is the kind of, frankly, demagoguery that I find utterly and completely offensive, and it's against any interest that we have in world peace or world affairs.